Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking something incredibly complex, the Brahminical perspective on the Indian caste system. We're going to look at this strictly through the lens of classical academic texts. Think of it kind of like examining an ancient architectural blueprint for a society. We'll be exploring the structural logic, the design, and the exact mechanics of how this hierarchy was originally envisioned by the people at the very top.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First up, the blueprint of hierarchy. Second, we'll cover the ideology of purity. Third, we'll break down the Judgmani system. And finally, we'll look at modern shifts and critiques. Let's get to it.
Section 1. The Blueprint of Hierarchy, Scriptural Origins. All right, so the entire Brahminical worldview gets its legitimacy straight from sacred religious texts written in Sanskrit, which was literally considered the language of the gods. Now, you might be wondering about two terms that get thrown around and often confused today: Varna and Jati. According to the ancient text, Varna actually means color. If we look at early references in the Rig Veda, they contrast the light-complexioned Arya Varna with the darker Dasa Varna. Over time, this evolved into four broad social orders. Jati, on the other hand, is way more specific. The ancient lawgiver Manu suggested that Jatis actually sprang up from mixed marriages between the different Varnas, which eventually formed thousands of very distinct, localized occupational groups.
And that brings us to the ultimate origin story. It's found in a famous hymn called the Purusha Sukta. It essentially pictures the four main Varnas emerging from the actual body parts of a primeval man, or Purusha. So from the mouth came the Brahmins, who were ordained to master sacred texts and preach. From the arms came the Kshatriyas, the warriors and protectors. From the thighs, the Vaishyas, the traders and cultivators. And finally, from the feet came the Shudras, whose ordained role was to serve everyone else. Basically, this scriptural anatomy dictated a person's societal duty right from birth.
But the blueprint goes a lot deeper than just body parts. Let's look at the guna theory, as analyzed by scholar Marvin Davis. This really builds the internal logic of the system. The texts propose that three fundamental materials, or gunas, combine within the human body. First, there's sattva, which is associated with white, purity, and spiritual goodness. Then you have rajo, which is red, producing energy, egoism, and action. And finally, tamo, which is black, engendering laziness and base behavior. According to the texts, your natural varna is determined by whichever guna predominates inside you.
Now, here's the really fascinating part. These internal gunas, they aren't entirely static. They're actually affected by how you live your daily life. For instance, a vegetarian diet and religious rituals actively build up sattva, elevating your spiritual purity. On the flip side, engaging in warfare or commerce builds rajo, and consuming beef, spoiled food, or alcohol, well, that builds tamo, resulting in pollution. Even the way you marry can mix these physical natures and literally elevate or degrade your group's rank over generations.
Yet, despite this incredibly detailed blueprint, there's a really interesting tension in the texts when it comes to the Brahmin and the king. It's a bit of a conundrum. While the texts place Brahmins at the absolute top due to ritual purity, what they call a higher level of truth, there is also a practical lower level of truth, because here on earth, it's the kings who hold the actual physical power and the wealth. So you end up with this dynamic where the Brahmin absolutely needs the king for protection and sponsorship, but the king equally needs the Brahmin to legitimize his rule through ritual.
Moving on to Section 2, the ideology of purity, the mechanics of separation. According to the highly influential sociologist Louis Dumont, the absolute root of this social hierarchy is a stark opposition between the pure and the impure. To really get this, we have to contrast two types of impurity defined by the texts. First, there's permanent impurity. This is inherited. It's assigned to castes whose traditional jobs force them to handle waste or death. Think washermen cleaning soiled linen, or cobblers working with animal leather. Temporary impurity, however, is a totally equal opportunity defilement. It affects absolutely everyone during specific biological life events like birth, death, or menstruation. Even the highest Brahmin incurs temporary impurity and requires ritual cleansing, like bathing in sacred water.
And things get incredibly complex here. Anthropologist Henry Orenstein mapped out these pollution rules and categorized them into two spreading mechanisms. First is transitive pollution. This is what you catch from the outside, like touching an untouchable or eating from a polluted spoon. Then there's intransitive pollution. This spreads internally through your family tree, like when a relative is born or passes away. And here's a mind-blowing detail. The texts actually dictate that the higher your Varna, the less intense your intransitive pollution is during family deaths compared to the lower castes.
Crazy, right?
Taking this down to a microscopic level, scholars Marriott and Inden proposed something called the dividual particle theory, based on Hindu texts. This theory suggests that humans aren't just whole, closed-off individuals, we're actually made of separable portions. When we interact with each other, especially when we share warm food or water, we are literally exchanging invisible coded substance particles. The idea is that you absorb good particles from higher castes and polluted particles from lower castes, and your body heat recombines them, actively altering your state of purity in real time.
All right, Section 3, the Judge-Mani System explained, the economics of caste.
So how did all this invisible particle exchanging and ritual purity actually work out in the dirt and dust of a real everyday village? Well, at the heart of village economics is the relationship between the Jajman and the Common. The Jajman is the patron, usually from an upper caste landowning family. The Common is the service provider, the barber, the washerman, the sweeper. But the Common isn't just providing physical labor for grain or cash. Ritually speaking, the Common is actively absorbing the temporary pollution of the Jajman. They do this to keep the patron ritually pure, so the patron can continue communicating with the gods.
This whole system operates on three really fascinating realities. Number one, functional interchangeability. If a village happens to lack a specific caste, another caste might temporarily step up to perform that duty. Number two, temporal continuity. These are generational contracts, guys. A barber's son literally inherits the duty to serve the patron's son. And number three, which is probably the most interesting, role interchangeability. An ironsmith might act as a kameen, serving a Brahmin patron, but that exact same ironsmith is the Jajman patron to the village washerman.
However, since we're grounding this explainer in academia, we definitely need to look at the skepticism. Scholars like Good offer a strong alternative viewpoint. He argues that Jajman and Jajmani are strictly Hindi terms. By projecting this Jajmani system onto the whole of India, like the Tamil-speaking South for instance, academics might actually be imposing an alien interpretation onto what are really localized, diverse economic relationships.
Which brings us to a really vital question. We've been looking at this intricate, rigid, highly idealized ancient blueprint based on scriptures. But how on earth does a system that relies on strict physical separation and dietary isolation operate under the stress, the speed, and the sheer chaos of the modern world?
Let's find out in Section 4, Modern Shifts and Critiques, Cracks in the System.
Basically, the scriptural blueprint has met the bulldozer of modernity. Let's look at the real-world forces that are eroding this ritual rigidity. Honestly, it starts with totally mundane things, like public transport. Think about it. When people are packed onto modern trains and buses, maintaining ancient rules of physical distance to prevent transitive pollution is literally impossible. Add to that the spread of modern, secular education, strict government laws criminalizing untouchability, and affirmative action policies like reservations, and the systemic foundations really begin to shift.
Furthermore, the people at the bottom definitely didn't just passively accept their scriptural fate. Sociologist M.N. Srinivasan coined a really important term for this, Sanskritization. This is the phenomenon where lower, marginalized castes actively attempt to rise up the social hierarchy by adopting the very lifestyle codes of the Brahmins. We're talking about taking up vegetarianism, giving up alcohol, and adopting upper caste rituals. Basically, they're actively trying to rewrite their own gunas and social standing.
Academically speaking, the Brahminical perspective faces some fierce pushback today. Sociologist Gerald Behrman argues that this entire perspective relies on incredibly biased, idealized Sanskrit texts written by the exact same people who are benefiting from them. He asserts that it completely ignores human defiance and individual will, and it severely overemphasizes religious ritual while just glossing over the raw, brutal realities of economic and political power.
This subaltern viewpoint, meaning looking at the system from the bottom up, is perfectly captured in this powerful quote by Joan Mencher. She notes that the caste system doesn't merely provide every caste with special privileges. Rather, it leads to and strengthens the economic exploitation of the lower castes. From this perspective, the grand ideology of purity isn't just about spiritual rank at all. It's a calculated mechanism to keep the lower ranks isolated and unable to unite against those hoarding wealth and political power.
And that leaves us with one final provocative thought. We've mapped the anatomy of this hierarchy, the Varnas, the Gunas, the incredibly complex rules of purity. But does the idealized scriptural blueprint actually match the lived human reality? The ancient text built a pristine architecture of the mind, but the reality on the ground, driven by economics, power, and human resistance, tells a vastly different story. It's definitely something to chew on as you continue exploring this topic. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the blueprints.